There was a very good song that came out that says, "Are we on the eve of destruction?" I remember as a kid we were building, I didn't do it, but we had friends build fallout shelters and all that stuff, and people were certain that the Russians were going to nuke us. But it seems like today the threats are even more ominous than Russia nuking us, because today we have terrorism, we have, Washington, D.C. now stands for District of Corruption. We don't have an election, we have a Jerry Springer show. So anyway, it's quite a mess right now, and I guess I've been a prepper fully since about when I came back from Vietnam, and I realized that we were being lied to. So with that, the question is, are we on the eve of destruction? But more importantly, what you can do about it. So we have three great guests today. We're going to start with the first one. His name is Glenn Martin. He is famous. He's the owner of the Prepper Broadcasting Network. And he lives where everybody should live, on the border of Canada, so he can get across the border quickly. So welcome to the program, Glenn.
Well, thank you for having me, and that was quite an introduction. Boy, expert even. I like that.
Well, everybody's an expert when you get on the program. Hey, let me ask you this. We were talking earlier before we got on the show is, what is the bee on your bonnet? Like, with me, I just don't trust my government. I don't even listen to what they have to say anymore. But what drives you to where you moved from to northern Idaho?
I like the mountains. I like a little bit more solitude, although, we still got the big towns, the big city. Boise, Idaho is just a skip away. But it's a little bit more comfortable and not as crowded. So that's what pleases me. As far as, the bee in my bonnet, what's going on now, of course, there's always something going on, but I guess, the upcoming election, the lack of choice we have, and the concern of where we're going, where our country's going, and in the shape that, our economy's in.
But are you forecasting or predicting or concerned about, the apocalypse or something like that, some event that just brings down the house of cards or something like this?
Well, everybody, and especially in the prepper community, everybody has a short list of what they see as being, the priorities to prepare for. I think right at the top of most of those lists right now would be the economy and what's going to happen. And if there's a collapse, how are you going to feed yourself? And that's certainly one of the things at the top of my list.
Well, what would cause the economy to collapse? I mean, we have great infrastructure, we have great road systems, great food distribution.
Well, we've got a dollar that's not, worth a dime. California, my son is a long-haul truck driver, and he refers to California quite a lot in that poorest road conditions of any state he travels in now because they don't have the tax money to keep their roads up.
So let me ask you this. Let me ask you this. So what is, in your definition, a prepper?
Yeah, and I've been really involved in this for the past 5 or 6 years using that term prepper. But, people have been around forever, and prepper's nothing more really than what our grandmothers and grandfathers did. It's all about self-sufficiency and self-reliance, being able to take care of yourself without relying on government or any other entity to take care of you. When you look back at these catastrophes that we've had, Katrina and what have you, you see these people out on rooftops waiting for government help that, don't have any water or no food. So, it's just insurance, and it's probably the smartest insurance a person could have is to have, if not a month, a week's worth of water or food set aside.
So how are you prepped up in northern Idaho?
I've got my critters, I like to call them, that I take care of daily. That's the cows and the the horses, the pigs, and the chickens, and what have you. And then, of course, we have probably a good 60 days worth of food that we rotate to always have food on hand. I would love to be off grid. Just as a new girlfriend I just found, she was unfamiliar with the term prepper. And I run across her at a function and got to know her. And lo and behold, she lives totally off grid other than her phone. Not a prepper. She just lives that lifestyle, solar panels, everything.
A
So,
soulmate. A soulmate. How lucky can you be?
well, yeah, and find some, I haven't been interested, in several years. I wasn't on the look, but boy, when I run into her and find out she's living the lifestyle that I live and trying to teach others about, yeah,
Okay,
it's
so
a match made in heaven.
what would you say to somebody living in East LA or New York City or, someplace that's urban where you got neighbors, should we say? What would you say to them?
If you're happy where you are and you're not concerned about things that could happen,
Now, let's say
you're
let's say you're where you're at and you are concerned. You live in this high rise. You commute to work. You don't have a car. Your supermarket is down the block. Everything's pretty self-contained. Wouldn't the city? What I'm trying to get at, isn't the city probably one of the most dangerous places to be?
Well, I would say in terms of a collapse scenario, absolutely. It'd probably be the most dangerous place you could be. And I'm not talking, people prep in the city. We have shows about apartment preppers and what have you. So you can be prepared, but you're going to, if we have a major disaster in a city or a financial collapse or what have you, there's going to be a lot of hungry people, and they're going to want to feed their families, and they're going to want to take what you have in order to feed their family. And if you don't think so, you need to find somebody or wait until you run across somebody that is that hungry, or their family and children are that hungry.
So what is a prepper doing, let's say in Manhattan, New York City?
They're concerned, of course, about having some kind of a stockpile of food or water that will last them through whatever scenario may occur. But I think also a bigger concern for that type of a prepper would also be self-defense, the ability to hang on to what they have, to keep others from looting and getting or taking what they have.
How about if I live in suburbia? I got neighbors all around me, and I'm 25 miles out of the metropolitan area, but I'm still 100 miles from where you live. What would you say to a suburban person with a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house?
Well, I think still probably a good idea would be to have another location. I mean, I think as you mentioned at the beginning of the show, you have a couple of places that you can visit or stay at should you want, but to have that go-to place, that what preppers refer to as a bug-out location. If things get tough where you're at, to have that backup, that second home that you could go to that maybe is a little further into the country or away from where.
So what would a bug-out place be? Be for the Mr. Mom who lives downtown suburbia? Is it a campsite, or is it another house, or what?
Well, it could be a campsite that is not so well known to the majority of the populace. It could be that acre or two that they own out in the country that's a little more off grid or further away from the general populace.
And then you prep out there. You have food and water out, and shelter and power.
Yeah, keep it stocked, keep it ready, and if you need a place to go when yours becomes unsafe, if it does, then you've got that place. You've got that backup plan.
Well, Glenn, thank you very much. I wish I had more time, but you're fantastic. Keep up the good work. It's Glenn Martin, owner of the Prepper Broadcasting Network. His website is prepperbroadcasting.com. This is a very important show because we're talking about the eve of destruction and how you can prepare for it both physically and financially. So I would suggest, going to richdadradio.com, listen to this program again, but especially if you have loved ones or family and friends and business people who need to think about the eve of destruction, even if it doesn't come. Are you prepared for it in case it does come? So that's all our programs are archived at richdadradio.com. I want to thank our special guest. His name was Glenn Martin. He is the guru on the American Prepper movement, and he was fantastic. The second part of this program, we're going to what you can do financially. And these are dear friends of ours, Dr. Chris Martinson and Adam Taggart. Chris lives in Massachusetts, and Adam lives in the Communist Republic of California. And they're the founders of peakprosperity.com. Chris is an economic researcher and futurist, specializing in energy and resource depletion. And Chris and Adam are the authors of the latest book, Prosper, How to Prepare for the Future and Create a World Worth Inheriting. And Chris is the author of The Crash Course, The Unsustainable Future of Economy, Energy, and Environment. I mean, Chris, that book, The Crash Course, really, really put perspective on how fast and how quick we are on the eve of destruction. Welcome to the program, you guys.
Thanks, Robert. Great to be back with you.
Welcome, comrade, I should say, I guess.
Comrade. Hey, Adam just sent me some beef from his sustainable beef farm in California. Is that your prepper thing? You're selling beef now?
It is. I mean, it's part of an entrepreneurial venture, following a lot of what you write about and advocate, Robert. But a big part of it, is when the eve of destruction arrives. If you're the guy who's providing the protein to your community, it's a pretty good place to be.
And Chris, what's happening with you in the Communist Republic of Massachusetts?
Well, we're looking forward to a brisk season of tax hikes and regulatory encroachment. I don't know, the usual.
It's always the same. I don't know why you guys live in those two states, man. I like to keep my money. I don't want to just pay for it. But anyway, Chris, would you mind a really quick, brief synopsis? What was your wake-up call? When did you realize that Greenspan was not taking care of the economy?
2001 was where I first started to get really interested in this thing called the economy. My portfolio got shredded like everybody's. I was just a dyed-in-the-wool paycheck-earning saver. I had my head in the sand. I thought that's how you did life. And so once I really started to investigate, Robert, started to really look into how the economy worked, most importantly, how money printing works, I got a little concerned. It was clear that our economy was unsustainable in a lot of dimensions. And once I really peeled back the covers and connected a few other dots, particularly around energy, also the environment, put it all in one spot, that's when I got really concerned and needed to change a lot of things in my life and my family's life and really begin to become serious about the challenges we're facing in this world.
Right. And I want to tell you again, Chris Martins's book is The Crash Course. Please read it. It is so, Chris is a doctorate, not a medical doctor, but he writes like a researcher, yet he keeps it simple and he uses very, very clear, should I say, mental illustrations of how dire a position the world is in right now. So please get his book, The Crash Course. And Chris, I have a new title for people like you. I'm writing my next book, Why the Rich Are Getting Richer, and I call your category The Millionaire Next Door. All the guys who had a job, they had their portfolios, the house was going up in value, and you all drove Toyotas and Volvos. That guy Stanley said this is the millionaire next door. Well, the millionaire next door after 2000 became the foreclosure next door. So, But anyway, your partner is Adam Taggart, who lives in California. Adam's a great guy. And Adam, tell us how you got to this point of view, because both of you guys are the academics, man. You are the A students. Adam, you went to Stanford and all that?
I did. So I sort of fell down this hole soon after I graduated from business school at Stanford, where I was living in Silicon Valley. And my wife and I went to buy a house. And this was a house built in the 70s, plain vanilla starter home. Nothing had been done to it. And the sticker was about $850,000. And I was told if I really wanted the house, I should bid $100,000 over asking, which I did, and ended up getting so far outbid they didn't even invite me to counter. And that happened once or twice more to me. And I just figured, look, I'm a relatively smart guy, but I'm just not seeing why housing is so damn expensive out here. And went online and started reading up on the housing market, and began learning that there was bad policy that was creating a housing bubble, a housing asset bubble. And the only voices that made sense to me in this were the guys who were warning about that bubble, and they were the only ones that actually had real data. And Chris was amongst that group of writers that I was following. And then a few years later, 2007 happened, and 2008 quickly followed. And a lot of what these guys who were really resonating with me were warning about, was now getting validated in the market. And that's when I really realized the people with the models like Chris who are warning about the unsustainability of the macro system are really onto something. And once sort of, that was all made clear to me, I've never seen the world the same since.
Right. So, Chris, what is your doctorate in?
It's in neurotoxicology, so basically just studying how nerves die, mostly.
That make a good economist, because we're dying.
Well, it does. The department that comes out of is pathology, and so yes, I'm able to conduct postmortems on the economy, all that. But really, my training is about how nothing is black and white. Everything's a risk. You have to understand what the risks really are. And once I understood and looked at the world that way, that's what's in the crash course. It's just connecting dots in a way that once people see it that way, they tend to go, oh, yeah, that makes sense with what I'm reading. It makes sense with what I feel in my gut. It actually has some predictive power because what they say is going to happen seems to happen. So I think it's a better explanation than what you get if you're reading the media.
So how do you guys, what would you recommend to the millionaire next door? The guy who has a high-paying job, he's got a portfolio of probably $3 million. He's got savings in the bank, which is being depleted like a wild man with interest rates going down. What would you say to the millionaire next door right now from what you've researched since your wake-up calls?
Well, I'll take that first, and then Adam can chime in. Look, it's really important to understand where we are in this story. We're in about a 40-year-old super bubble of credit. It started in the early 1980s. It's been going on ever since. It almost flew apart spectacularly in 2008. The central banks did everything they could to keep the credit bubble going a little further. It's global in nature, but when it falls apart, it's going to destroy a lot of wealth. That's how the millionaire next door is going to experience it. They're going to say, what happened to my $3 million? It either got stuck in a bank and stolen through a bail-in, or my portfolio got shredded, but it'll be gone, or half gone, or mostly gone, and they won't know what happened. But what's going to happen is what's happened many times in history when the government, the Federal Reserve, your central bank, they start printing money to get out of a little problem, but they create a bigger one. And when they do that and it blows up, and they always do, what happens is people will talk about it as if their wealth got destroyed, but if you watch carefully, what's really going to happen is wealth is going to be transferred. It's going to be taken from one person and given to somebody else. That's happening right now. That will accelerate, and a lot of people are going to wake up, Robert, who don't have the context. They're going to wake up one day and say, wow, I feel a lot poorer. They will be a lot poorer. And if they don't have the education that you provide and that I provide and Adam provides, if they don't have that, they'll be confused, disappointed, and in some cases ruined.
Right. And then so let's hear from Adam because, again, what would you say to the millionaire next door? I have a lot of friends who are millionaires next door. They have jobs, they're doctors, lawyers, they're executives, and they have this multi-million-dollar portfolio and $2 million in the bank account. And they have a house that's, a $1 million house. What would you say to them?
Right. Well, I would say, we are definitely entering a very treacherous time for capital preservation, and I think you got to start with that clear understanding. As Chris said, I think we know the wide arc here of how things are going to progress, which largely is going to be money printing and the destruction or extreme devaluation of the currency. The problem is we don't know exactly the path it's going to take to get from A to Z. Our general advice to people is to get out of paper assets, on paper claims on things, and to actually have ownership of the real things themselves. So these might be tangible assets like commodities, obviously precious metals we're a fan of. It's real estate, but productive assets. And if you can, own productive real estate or productive enterprises, those are all things that are not going to go to zero and are going to have intrinsic value going forward. And on a relative basis, probably a higher relative value as paper claims begin to get printed away.
Once again, our guests are Chris Martenson and Adam Taggart, co-founders of peakprosperity.com. Our earlier guest was Glenn Martin. He was talking about how to cover your asset. You know what I mean? How to protect yourself, your body. Now we're talking about how to protect your physical or your financial assets. So let me quick ask this question. What do you suspect is coming down the road? Anything, got any crystal ball, stuff on that?
Well, I'll start again there. Listen, it's pretty clear that the bubbles have been created everywhere. And this is across the globe right now. So there's stock bubbles, there are bond bubbles, they're in financial assets. And the central banks did this on purpose because they thought, hey, we pump up financial assets and somehow we'll get this great recovery. So they've done that, but bubbles are always dangerous. Bubbles always burst. And When these bubbles burst, Robert, I'm really looking for financial market turbulence, dislocations, capital controls, everything you can think of in 2008, but worse this time, because we haven't learned the lessons, and the numbers are bigger this time. Too big to fail is bigger. Derivatives, larger. Sovereign debt, higher. So all of the things that were stresses last time are stresses this time, only bigger. And so really, I think people need to be prepared for very disruptive market conditions, and market crashes are a distinct possibility. Not a guarantee, but a very high possibility now.
So, Adam, what do you say? What does Crystal Ball say?
Yeah, well, I completely agree. And Chris and I more or less ascribe to this theory initially developed by a fellow named Eric Jansen called the Kapoom theory. Kapoom basically being the way a depth charge explodes, where you initially have a contraction before you have a massive explosion. And as Chris is saying, this will manifest first in market instability. And so we do think there will be a period of deflation where the natural market forces that want the bubbles to correct are going to win out, and you're going to see some pretty big market dislocations. And then you're going to see the massive policy response from the central banks and central planners of the world, where the money printing just goes on steroids, and the purchasing power of the currencies just get completely depleted. So the point here, and this is why I said it's a treacherous environment for investors, is you have to plan for both deflation and inflation. And so we're not huge fans of owning large piles of cash for the long haul for the bail-in risk reasons and the currency devaluation reasons. But in the short term, having some dry powder may come in very handy during that initial deflationary wave. You just have to be positioned to deploy it very quickly before the hyperinflationary wave comes.
So what's the bad news? I want to talk about, you guys wrote this book called Prosper, How to Prepare for the Future and Create a World Worth Inheriting. Chris, what is Prosper about?
Well, we've been talking about one of the important chapters in Prosper, which is how to preserve and maybe even build your financial capital. And in that chapter, we continued down a path you really started us down, which is thinking more carefully about how to become an entrepreneur and how important that framework is. But there are 7 other chapters like that, and Prosper is about the idea that there are multiple forms of capital, that if you are rich across all of these forms of capital, you will be more resilient, more prepared for whatever future comes, and you'll be happier, healthier, wealthier today. So an example of one of those other chapters would be emotional capital. What is that? How do you build that? But it turns out that the next economic crisis isn't going to hurt a lot of people nearly as badly as their reaction to it. And we've seen this time and time again. When an insult comes along or sometimes gets disruptive, some people shut down, numb themselves, drink too much, can't respond, don't know how to sell their stocks, which are bleeding like crazy, don't know when to jump back in when there's blood in the streets. So having emotional intelligence and working on your emotional resilience is actually really important. It's one of the most important things you can do. And so that's an example of another chapter that's in there. Prosper is about how we actually diversify ourselves, control what we can, so we're ready for whatever happens to come.
And our first guest today was Glenn Martin. He's the owner of Prepper Broadcasting. And our current guests are Chris Martenson, Adam Taggart, dear friends of ours, co-founders of Peak Prosperity, website peakprosperity.com. Chris is an economic researcher and futurist, specializing in energy and resource depletion. And Chris and Adam, the authors of Prosper, the latest book, How to Prepare for the Future and Create a World Worth Inheriting. And Chris is author of that fabulous book, The Crash Course. Please get it, because Chris writes in words that paint pictures. Makes it very clear what he sees coming. We're talking about what you can do to prepare for financial survival, but let's go into, we talk about the importance of being an entrepreneur and actually preparing for a brighter future. You see, I'm already into the future. I've been preparing for the future for a long time. So let's go, like this radio program is one thing I do to prepare for the program. I want to be able to keep communicating no matter what happens, if there's power. And I have my investments, like I have gold and silver just in case things go bad. I don't consider gold and silver an investment. And I have the other precious metals, guns and bullets. So I'm prepared. And the rich dad company is preparing to go into the future as more people realize there's a need for financial education. So I'm preparing for a brighter future. What do you recommend to the millionaire next door right now with their $1 million house, the $2 million portfolio, and $2 million in cash? What would you say to them?
Listen, if I'm in that situation where I have all of my wealth, and I'll put air quotes up, wealth is tied up in the stock market, maybe a little cash in the bank in my home, I'm going to want to diversify right away. And so one of the things we talk about in Prosper is absolutely, manage the money you've got as well as you can. Have a financial advisor do that, standard stuff. But you're going to want to take a portion of that, and you're going to want to dedicate a portion of your net wealth into building out your other resiliency that exists out there. And so, take care of all that. So let's say you've done that. Your house is in pretty good shape. You've got some gold and silver. Your funds are being taken care of well. This is where I really am in line with you, Robert. People have to have multiple lines of income. You've got to have that entrepreneurial spirit. If you have a single paycheck, I don't care how big it is, you are at risk. And obviously what you'd like to do is have lots of different cash flowing opportunities, residual income, lots of different ways that you can tap into a flow of money, because in the future, when this crash comes, a lot of things are going to go away. Now, that sounds doom and gloom, but for me, Robert, Adam and I are facing insurmountable opportunity right now. There will always be opportunities. But you have to – this is one of those times you got to be Wayne Gretzky. You got to skate to where the puck is. Those new opportunities are going to be very different from the ones we had in the past.
So, very good. Let's just tell you what, we have my friend Philip Haslam. He and I were down in South Africa talking. Philip is an expert on the monetary collapse of Zimbabwe. And I asked him, what became money after the Zimbabwe dollar collapse? He says, tampons and toilet paper. Yep. So that's about preparing for the future. They could be used as money. So anyway, that's an idea. Adam, what do you say?
What he said was social capital was a really critical success factor for the folks who actually did well post the currency collapse there.
In Zimbabwe.
These were the people that had the relationships to draw on to be able to get the goods or support that they needed in the community. And that's something that we definitely find that most of the millionaires next door feel that they are most poor in. They go to work, they get up, they commute, they work hard during the day. But in terms of actually knowing the people in their community, having people who they can count on in a crisis, somebody who can support them financially if they get a pig slip at work the next day, or if they have a health crisis, or obviously, something more dire where the community itself is under threat. They don't know their neighbors. They don't have a plan for actually banding together and supporting one another through times of crisis. And the challenge about community is it's not something that you can just instantly build overnight. It's something that takes a long time, oftentimes years, in developing relationships and that sense of trust amongst everybody. Get out there, get involved, find ways to be in service to those in your community so that, quite Machiavellian-like, in times of crisis, they're going to want you around as opposed to seeing you as a potential threat.
Because if you have resources, let's say in the worst case scenario, I have a house and food and goats and chickens and pigs, but your neighbors don't. Big problem, right?
Oh, very big problem, especially if you don't have a relationship with them where they know that you're going to use those resources, and help them with it. If they don't trust you, they're just going to come take it from you if they can.
So, Adam, you have a ranch with producing cattle. That's your preparation for the future?
That is definitely a component of my preparation for the future, for sure. And in that business is actually, that investment is a great example of why we wrote Prosper, where we think we have a pretty good beat on where the future's headed. But we don't know for certain. And the nice part about all the investments that we encourage people to make through the book Prosper are investments that even if we happen to be totally wrong, where the future ends up looking exactly like the same for the rest of our lives, these are all great investments that are life-enhancing for you. Getting fitter, becoming more respected in your community, being a better steward of your money, reducing your dependence on fossil fuels, et cetera. These are all things that are going to benefit you no matter what happens. But if a crisis does come around, the relative value of those investments is going to be so much higher. So in my case, I make a nice income stream off of this grass-fed cattle ranch. But again, my long-term plan is, hey, if we're ever at a time of real crisis, all of a sudden it's a food source for myself and my family, but we raise enough cattle that it should be a food source for the community, and the community is really going to want to keep me around because I'm providing them with a dependable source of local protein.
Okay. Once again, Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad Radio Show. We're talking to Chris Martenson, Adam Taggart, co-founders of Peak Prosperity, and we're talking about how you prepare the collapse ahead if it comes. Hopefully it doesn't come, but are you prepared? And I agree with Adam just said, is that by preparing, you can actually do very well. For example, I saw this crash coming back in the 80s, this change, because I don't trust the Fed. But anyway, so I just started investing in what I call low-income real estate near high industrial areas, because even if the stock market crashes, people will still need housing. So I invest in what I call basic essentials. Adam is investing in food, a basic essential. Toilet paper and tampons, basic essential. So that's kind of the way I started thinking a long, long time ago. I don't chase the stock market. I don't like it. I don't care if it goes up and down. I would rather have what's real. In the future, I want what's real. There's going to be food, shelter, toilet paper, tampons, fuel, that kind of stuff. Chris, any other comments?
We're seeing this play out as well right now, Robert, in Venezuela, where, again, I think tampons and toilet paper, very appreciated down there right now. And I know most people listening are thinking, well, we're in the United States, we're immune from all this. But we're not. The United States has got just a huge amount of debt that's overhanging right now, and most people think that because it hasn't mattered for 30 or 40 years, it'll never matter. It will. These things always come around, and this is going to happen sometime in our lifetimes. Will it start tonight? Will it be 10 years? We don't know, but we do know that we're on an unsustainable course. That means it will change. It doesn't mean the end of the world, except for people who don't have a clue and don't have a plan.
Right.
So that's one of the things we really advise people is, set aside some money now, but start developing your plan. What do you want to own and why? We think there's better prices coming, but you need to have a view of that. And I'm reminded of the story about when you were taught real estate investing. How many deals did you look at before you really understood what a good bargain was? Well, we think people need to start that same process for themselves, really think this through. What do I want to own and why? Because that will be the time, there will be a time to make a move for those assets.
Yeah, thank you. There's a couple of things I don't think people noticed was that one of the biggest shipping companies in the world, Hanjin, I believe, just declared bankruptcy.
Right.
The reason they declared bankruptcy is because trade between nations is drying up. They can't make enough money to pay for the ships. The second thing that I don't think people realize is that, especially the millionaire next door with their pension, their government pension or their whatever pension they have, is this lower interest rates are going to destroy those pensions because there's so many pension funds that are required by law to buy U.S. Treasury bonds. And at all times low, they can't perform. Most of these pension plans are built on an economic model of 7 to 8% return. Well, bonds are trading at negative return. How are they going to pay for your pension? So that's kind of what we're trying to say. Any comments? You guys have any idea on this idea of lower interest rates and how it affects pensions, especially the bonds?
Sure. It's killing them. It's killing them. So let's look at one of them, CalPERS, which is one of the largest ones out there in communist California. They're still assuming a 7% rate of return. They actually turned in 0.9% for last year. And every year that continues with those dismal returns is another year that they are compounding the disaster. And you know who's going to be on the hook for that? The taxpayers of the states involved are going to have to pay up for that. But also those pension promises are going to get whittled down. It's a whole world of pain that's coming. And whether it hits the taxpayers now or the pensioners later doesn't matter. So those promises won't be kept. People who are relying on those, counting on them, have to make other plans. They just have to. It would be foolish not to understand that you're not going to get paid. And so, what are you going to do instead? That's the kind of thinking a lot of people haven't engaged in. And I understand why. It's not pleasant, but it's the reality right now.
So if you have a government pension, think again. That's what Philip Haslam said in his book, When Money Destroys Nations. He talked about an attorney who was an attorney for 50 years. He contributed to his, it was called Old Mutual pension plan for 50 years. And due to hyperinflation and mismanagement by the government, when he retired, he was paid a one-time payout that could afford a can of gas.
Jeez.
After 50 years, his pension bought a can of gas. I want you guys to think about that. Any comments on that, Mr. Taggart, in the Communist Republic of California with CalPERS?
Yeah, well, I'm afraid we may see that movie play out someday in my home state here. I mean, that's an extreme example, but that is the risk that we run here. I mean, the pension fund crisis, and it is a crisis, is a massive ticking time bomb. And sadly, human nature being what it is and government officials being what they are, everybody is desperately trying to kick the can down the road as far as possible on this. But if you look at any municipality here, in most cases, the largest budget item by far is paying pensions to people who are not working.
That's what happened to Zimbabwe. They went down because they couldn't pay for the pensions.
Right.
You see, it's deja vu all over again.
It is deja vu all over again, and unfortunately, human nature being what it is it is a tough problem to fix, and nobody has the political will to say no to pensioners.
Hey,
and so they wait for the crisis to force the decision.
Hey, who was that wise man who says you can't fix stupid?
Must have been Einstein.
Yeah.
So before we close, let's have Chris. What's that one tip for listeners? What they can do to prepare? I mean, for real, money-wise, financially. What can they do?
You got to get educated. So read up and take advantage of the crash course, other materials like that. All of your books, obviously, that's step one. And that would be my first tip for anybody who hasn't self-educated. That's the most important thing today is the information. Make sure you got good information.
Right. So, Adam, one tip for our listener, the millionaire next door with their pension and their $1 million house and all that stuff.
Yeah, most of their wealth and most of their investing that they're familiar with is in paper stocks and bonds that they buy off of E-Trade. The one thing I would encourage people to really look into is local investing, is to actually start deploying your capital locally into real things. One, because I think those are things that will retain value, and two, those are things that your community is going to value you for. The challenge with local investing is it is very, very different than simply buying a stock off of E-Trade.
Thanks. A special first guest was Glenn Martin. He's the owner of the Prepper Broadcasting Network. And our second guests were dear friends Chris Martinson and Adam Taggart, co-founders of peakprosperity.com. Once again, this program is archived. If you have friends who are millionaire next door or they don't have any money, sit down, listen to this program again, and start discussing, because that's the purpose of it. Don't just keep it for yourself. And we're going to our most favorite part of our program, which is Ask Robert, and you can submit your questions to AskRobert@richdadradio.com. Once again, AskRobert@richdadradio.com. So, Melissa, what's the first question today?
Our first question today comes from Ian in Eugene, Oregon. Favorite book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. He says, Robert, I've heard you talk about the 5 Gs. Financially, I can't buy all these items at once. In your opinion, what is the first G I should focus on acquiring?
The 5 Gs I got a long time ago. The first G is gold. You should have some gold or silver, precious metals. Second, you should have ground, safe ground. I mean, like Oregon's a great place because a lot of safe ground up there. In fact, Glenn Martin of the Prepper Broadcasting, they recommend Eastern Oregon and stuff like that is a great place. Next is grub. You got to have food. And then fourth is gasoline. And fifth, my favorite one, guns. You got to protect yourself. If you have something, and the worst does happen, hopefully it doesn't, then you got to have a weapon. Okay. So for me, the 5 precious metals are gold, silver, guns, and bullets. But if you have no money, that's a very, very, very good question. I would start with food. Like when Kim and I had no money. We had a closet full of just canned goods, and they last forever. Just store them in there, have about a month worth of food. Second is water. Just have some bottled water in there in case things go bad and you have to hold up for a while. So it starts with the basics. So that's how I would start. You've got to cover the basics. The other thing I have is I have a gas can. So in case I need to get out of town, I can run out with, I don't have to go stand in line at the gas station. And every so often I just pour the gas back into the tank and refill the gas tank. So I'm ready to go with that. So you got to be ready to run if you run. So if you have no money, that's the way you start. If you're not the millionaire next door, just start with the basics. Next question, Melissa.
Our next question comes from Ramon in Mexico. Favorite book, Cash Flow Quadrant. He says, what is the best and first step in learning to invest in gold?
Well, I would get a book on it or something and just read it, because there's so many opinions on gold as why it's good and why it's bad. But, that we had Harry Dent on this program, very smart guy, and he's calling for gold to go to $250. And then we have this guy, James Rickards, author of Currency Wars, another smart guy. He's calling for gold to go to $10,000. So somewhere in between is reality. But as I've said many times, I don't think of gold as an investment. I think it as an insurance policy. I think it as a hedge, it's called. So rather than invest in gold, I would start with silver. You see, because if there's these little green boxes with 500 ounces, 500 silver coins in them, get 2 or 3 green boxes or buy 1 silver coin a day, or only $20. And then because if the currency does collapse like it did in Zimbabwe, at least silver can be used as money. That's the best advantage of it. So I have these little green boxes. Go to any gold dealer. But don't buy numismatic. Numismatics, the guy will say, oh, here's a rare 1902, and, it's only $18,000, and it'll go up in value. Don't buy that. That's called numismatic. They can make up any value for a numismatic coin. You just want to play spot. If silver is $20, you want to pay as close to silver as $20. If gold is $1,500, you want to pay as close to $1,500 per ounce. But it's not really an investment. It's just a hedge in case the dollar or the yen or the euro collapse. And I hold physical gold. Now, if you don't like physical gold, then buy an ETF. The reason I don't like ETF gold is because there's a thing called claims. So let's say I'm selling you an ETF. I have 1 ounce in gold. I can sell that 1 ounce 500 times. It's called a fractional reserve. So in case you really wanted that gold, you couldn't get it anyway because the 500 other guys claiming for it. And what an ETF will do is they'll pay you back in dollars. See, I don't want dollars. I want gold. So the great debate is between real gold and paper gold. For me personally, I like real gold and real silver. I don't keep it in a safe deposit box. I don't keep it in my house. I have a special hiding place just in case, what happens. Next question, Melissa.
Our next question comes from Mark in Columbus, Ohio. Favorite book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. With the Fed printing nonstop, isn't this causing the dollar to become less valuable every day?
Duh. It's the money, stupid. The real economic crisis is the money. It's no longer money. In 1971, President Nixon took the dollar off the gold standard. Well, that's not the first time they've done it. They've been doing that for centuries. The Romans tried it. Mao Zedong tried it. Because the government can't pay its bills, it just prints money. So in 71, we couldn't pay our bills. So Nixon and friends took the dollar off the gold standard and they printed it. The good news is the economy boomed. The trouble is, so did the debt, because in 71 the dollar became debt, and our debt now is out of sight. And the question is right now, can they keep printing? That's the question. And the reason interest rates are so low is because they want mom and pop investor to take the money out of savings and put it in the stock market. That's a suicide mission. And at the same time, because interest rates are so low because they've printed so much money, is that all the pension plans like CalPERS, the California Public Service, in other words, the pension plan for employees, it's not going to work. They're going to have to bail out pension plans all over the world now. Because a pension plan, most of them, you have to buy a government bond. And the government bonds used to pay like 10, 15%. Now they're paying nothing. So the numbers are not going to work. So if you're sitting there, well, I got a good, safe job in California or Florida, or wherever you think you are, well, your state government's toast. They can't pay you your pension. That happened in Detroit. They couldn't pay you the pensions. So think again, because interest rates are so low on bonds, the pension plans are not working. So that's why this whole program today was really about, if you're poor, what can you do? Start with basic foods, toilet paper, tampons. That might be money someday. If you have a little bit more money, go to gold. Probably silver is the best idea. Get some gasoline. And if you're rich, like my wife and I have a sailboat, huge sailboat, water cooler, food and all that. I'm just going to climb on my sailboat and go to sea. Now, if I can't get there, I have a safe house not too far away from me. And we have another safe house in South Carolina. That's where we hide. Because as Adam Taggart said and Chris Martenson said, it's called social capital. Who are your friends? Remember this. If you're a medical doctor and what hits the fan, they're going to want to keep you alive. They hopefully have some drugs like heart attack medicine, whatever you got. And if you have a machine gun, they definitely want to keep you alive because you probably have bullets. So they want to keep you alive. That's social capital. But like I said, between my doctor friend and me is a stockbroker. He's on the dinner list right now.